We're now going to consider the matter of artists in conflict with society. Sometimes artistic work brings an artist in conflict with their community, and quite often the conflict emerges when the artist is presenting artwork that somehow challenges or goes outside of the standards of the community. Indeed, part of the relationship of the artist-society can be conflict. The essential nature of the conflict is when artists exceed or go outside of the social and moral standards of the community. And in fact, quite often in recent times, when there is debate or discussion, and if there's some type of legal or freedom of speech question that is raised, the wording that's often cited is exceeding the social and moral standards of the community. Our first work we're going to look at and consider this notion of conflict is a photograph that was created by Andre Serrano in 1987. Ostensibly, he created this work by placing a crucifix, an image of a crucifixion, into a bucket of urine, into a small glass vial of urine, and then photographing it using special filters and special color camera film to create this glowing and reddish and golden image that you see before you. The small dots that appear throughout the entire image are to be air bubbles inside the liquid that is containing the crucifix. It's referred to as piss Christ because Serrano claimed or said that he had taken his urine and had placed this crucifixion into this bucket of urine. Now, if we did not know that part of the story, if we did not know the title of the work, and we looked at the work itself, we would think that we were experiencing a photograph of a crucifixion image inspired by the Middle Ages in some way. But again, it's a photograph. And we have symbolic colors, the gold of knowledge, and the red color, the blood, color of blood, which is the symbol of life. The conflict and the debate began when the title of this particular work became known to the public, Piss Christ. Now, it is also debated that maybe he didn't really put this image into a vial of urine and take the photograph. He may have put it into a bucket of polyurethane. Now, that's an interesting theory because that would allow for the golden colored image to show up. And also, if you take polyurethane and place something into it, it's a very viscous liquid, a very thick liquid, and so any air bubbles would be sustained and supported in the liquid itself. But again, Serrano says that he placed it into a canister of urine to take that photograph. So it's in many respects a very offensive title. The work itself is not offensive just to look at it. It looks like crucifixions from the Middle Ages, artwork that you see very commonly in Christian society. At the same time, it is the title that inflames the community. How dare someone place a crucifixion, a symbol of Christianity, into a bucket of urine? Well, there are two other interesting perspectives upon this particular way of looking at it. One is concerning Lucy Lippard, who is an art historian and art critic, and she argues for the value of this work under formal artistic values. In other words, color, hue, the way lighting is worked, texture, all these particular types of elements and the way the principles of art are displayed in this particular work, the sense of depth and perspective that you get. Also notice the way that this particular cross is set off at a slight angle. And so we have good clear focus on the leading edge, what would be the Jesus' right arm and right hand and that transept of the cross. And then it becomes blurrier on his left hand as it goes back in space. So, there are spatial values as well. High contrast. There's really only two hues or colors that are represented in this particular work. It's red and yellow. Now, there is a little bit of orange in transition, but the reds and the yellows and just very tiny, tiny touches of brown to highlight the cross itself are really the only colors present. So the palette, the color selection is very, very limited. So it creates a great sense of unity. So again, she appeals to the art world and the audience by saying, no, there are formal artistic values present here, and we need to consider the merit of the artwork based on that. There's another interesting perspective by Sister Wendy Beckett. You may know Sister Wendy Beckett from television. She is a nun and a member of the Catholic Church, obviously. She is also an art historian, and she has produced and broadcast numerous art history television programs. And her statement is she's not offended by this. In her words, this is what we have done to Christ. In other words, we have taken the sacred image of him, according to Christianity, and placed him in a bucket of urine. So how can she be offended? So she is able to address this particular work in this way. Nonetheless, this work has incited a great deal of controversy, perhaps more so because of the title than the work itself. We can't tell the exact specifications and materials and what's going on in this photograph. We only know from the title itself. Now, the other part of conflict of this is that while Serrano was creating this and other photographs, he was receiving a development grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. So this is the second layer of conflict. We have a local or regional layer where the title will inflame the local community, and then we have a national concern because we have an artwork which was created while the artist was being supported in part by a professional development grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. So there's now a political dimension to this conflict as well. To the extent that because of this work and some other works that came out about the same time, there was a great deal of outrage in the Senate. Al D'Amato and Jesse Helms were very concerned that Serrano received $15,000 for work as part of the grant. He did not receive a commission to create this specific work, but he received money to help support his work as an artist while he was creating this work. And this caused great outrage with the senators D'Amato and Helms, and became part of a large national public debate in 1989. Now, outrage doesn't go away over time. It's interesting, too, because this work was attacked at an exhibition in France in 2011. It was a work that was on exhibition under an exhibition called Je crois au miracle, I believe in miracles, at the Collection Lambert in Avignon, France. There were individuals who went into this exhibition and attacked the work on the wall. The work was framed under glass, but attacked the work with an ice pick, trying to destroy it. It is interesting that this group of people chose to do this, even though in the United States and some other parts of the world the debate about it had died down over time. But these particular individuals were very zealot. They felt that they had been the values of their community had been marginalized and nominalized by this particular work, and they were going to seek to destroy this work. So if this were a play, here's Act 2. And we're going to take a look for a second at Robert Mapplethorpe, another photographer, and an exhibition of his work in 1989. And the work is called The Perfect Moment. It was a solo photography exhibit that was put together by the Contemporary Art Gallery, which was part of the University of Pennsylvania. That gallery received support from local and regional foundations, the Robert Mapplethorpe Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Pennsylvania Council for the Arts, and the City of Philadelphia. Robert Mapplethorpe, as an American photographer, is a significant figure, and his artistic agenda is to share and to reveal aspects of the gay community publicly. And so, while he did photograph in his career numerous works that were not of gay content. There were many works that he did that were gay and included sometimes content of homoerotic or sadomasochistic acts. So here's the debate. In 1989, the Corcoran Gallery in Washington, D.C. was to receive the touring exhibition that had been put together. It had shown in Pennsylvania, it had shown someplace else, and now it was going to go to the Corcoran in Washington, D.C. What happened is the board of the Corcoran, the body of individuals that have a fiscal responsibility for the financial success of the gallery, the Corcoran, has senators on its board and other leading politicians. When members of the board discovered that there was going to be this content which was exceeding the standards of some communities, they decided that they were not going to have this there. Now, this traveling exhibition, again, had received a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. So we have a situation where some of the content of an exhibition is in conflict with standards of individuals in the community, and we also have government involved too, because again, the National Endowment for the Arts had provided this grant to the University of Pennsylvania Contemporary Art Project. The perfect moment referred to an ideal in photography where there would be a perfect moment when a photographer could take the precise photograph that they wanted to present something as artistically as possible. And so this was a retrospective exhibition. It included work from early in his career, in his middle career, and his latest career, and in fact included some work that was present just shortly before his death, that he took shortly before his death. So here are two photographs from the Perfect Moment exhibition. This does not, the photographs you see do not include some of the homoerotic or sadomasochistic content that was shown at the Corcoran. By the way, the compromise that came about with the Corcoran exhibition is the Corcoran declined the exhibition, but then it was arranged that it would be exhibited elsewhere at a contemporary art gallery in Washington, D.C. So people in Washington, D.C. who wanted to see this exhibit could go to this other contemporary art gallery. But again, we have two photographs from the Perfect Moment exhibition retrospective. We have a photograph on the left from an earlier part of Robert Mapplethorpe's career, and on the right we have a photograph that was taken just shortly before his death. On the left, we have two men standing there. It's a genre portrait. It's a double portrait. And it's not uncommon to see in the history of photography portraits like this. A man and a woman, or two men, or two women, or a mother and a child. Usually the younger is seated, the older is standing. So Mapplethorpe has followed all of those particular conventions. What becomes a little bit dicier is the way the men are dressed and what's being suggested by the photograph. They're both wearing biker leathers. That itself is not unusual, but to be sitting in a drawing room or sitting room in a contemporary New York City apartment in biker leathers, that's a little unusual, especially in a genre portrait of this kind that has its origins clear back in the 19th century. Another thing that is socially disturbing is the young man is bound up in chains, being held by rings by the older man, who is the standing one. The older man is also holding what appears to be a whip in his left hand. So we do have elements of sadomasochism in this particular photograph, and that is disturbing. But yet these two men are being presented just as if a younger boy and his father would be presented, or two other people would be presented in a genre photograph. We could take time and consider elements of texture, contrast. Notice how Mapplethorpe is able to use light and shadow and contrast between the dark portions and the lighter portions of the images. A lot of unusual things in this particular picture. The stand that is holding the lamp that's next to the older man, the very spiky antler-looking supports that are holding that table up, that's a little bit unusual. But aside from that, you have the Persian rug on the floor, and you have what appears to be a very normal portrait. It's as if Mapplethorpe is toying with us in some way. He's challenging us and saying, look here, this is normal. Why do you think this is not normal, perhaps? So it's an unusual photograph, but again, this is from earlier in his career. Now let's take a look at the photograph on the right. We have two men, a black man and a white man. Both of them, their heads are shaved. But again, it's a very interesting study in formal qualities. There's not a strong emotional connection that we have between the two individuals as we see them. It's more intellectual. It's really more of a photograph that's taken for its formalistic purposes, and that's the aesthetic category. We would place it in, unlike the photograph on the left, which we could place it either an imitational category or an emotionalism category. But again, this one on the right, the black man and the white man. And the contrasts are very subtle and very revealing and interesting. We have a closeness or an intimacy between the two men, the white man placing his head over the shoulder of the black man. The black man's eyes are closed, the white man's eyes are opened. The definition of the lines, the shapes, and also the extreme high contrasts, the very dark parts of the background and the dark shadows around the black man especially, and then the high contrast of the brilliant whites reflecting off the skin of the white man. And again, he's placing elements of great contrast right next to each other. Look at that area, the gap between the black man's shoulder and the white man's throat. That very darkest black section in there. Again, right next to some of the highlights on the white man's skin. On the black man's skin, we have a lot of highlights created by the lighting as well. And we don't know what the white man is looking at. We don't know what the black man is not looking at. But there is a very interesting symmetry to this work. There's a repetition. There's a dyadic structure, a binary structure in this work. We have 1 and 2, 1 and 2, 1 and 2. We could go farther in terms of the comparison of the shapes and what Mapplethorpe was able to achieve in taking this particular photo. But again, a work of excellent quality from a formalistic standpoint. But again, controversial because it was part of the show. Let's go to a sister art form here. In as much as Robert Mapplethorpe's photographs were quite often very theatrical in nature and evoked a strong emotional response from people, we're now going to consider Ethel Frugard, who was born in 1932. He was an author and a playwright from South Africa. And his type of conflict with the community was one that he opposed apartheid, and his work his artistic agenda led down this path of anti-apartheid very strongly. In 1958, he created a multiracial theater in Johannesburg in response to apartheid. He wanted to get the blacks and the whites, the natives and the Afrikaners up on stage together to challenge people and just to show people that we're all people and what was going on with apartheid was wrong. Now, very interestingly enough, in order to avoid problems for himself and his family, his writings and his plays had to be produced outside of South Africa. Otherwise, it would incite local riots, public bigotries, and make him and his family a target for violence, perhaps. So his work as an artist was not realized in his own country. It always went outside his country. He supported the anti-apartheid movement that started in 1959 and went all the way up to 1994, and that included economic and academic boycotts of South Africa. But he was all part of that scene. We're going to take a moment and consider an interview with Ethel Frugard. One of his plays was being produced in San Diego, and this is a brief interview that went on about his motivations to write and why he writes, and it gives us some insight into his artistic agenda and why it was so incredibly important as an artist and as a human being to do what he did, even though it was in conflict with his community and with what the official public policies of his nation. Let's listen to and watch Frugard's interview here.
at the heart of it is a man's journey to some sort of insight into himself and the fact that he has harbored prejudice for a long time in his life. Central to the story, as told in the play, are two incidents which happened to this main character, Henry Parsons, a retired sort of alcoholic school teacher, college professor. And those two experiences, which deal with prejudice, actually happened to me. And I just felt compelled to try and exorcise them in terms of myself by writing a play about them. Well, I'm a compulsive storyteller. I know I've been described as lots of different sorts of animal. I've been called a political playwright, I've been called this and that, but I essentially think I'm a storyteller. And I tell the stories that come out of my own life and those of the lives of my people in South Africa. And the exciting part about theatre is to see those stories come to life on a stage. It's an incredibly rich relationship as far as I'm concerned. You know, one of the things you dream about as a playwright is finding the director. The director will understand what you as a playwright, what you are about, will understand how and why you wrote a particular play. And from the moment I first met Gordon, we first started talking on the phone before we actually met in person, I realized that I was talking to somebody who was profoundly insightful into my own particular chemistry as a writer. And it's a great blessing to come along at this point in my life, 77 years old, and I've found the director I've been waiting for. The act of watching a play in a theatre is very active, is intensely active. And you ask the actors about that, and they will themselves tell you that, you know, you can't do that play on that stage and give your all if there isn't somebody sitting in those seats in front of you. And so the whole question of viewership in a theatre is a very active one. Out in the real world, outside of the theatre, well, it raises some very, very profound moral issues. Because as a South African, I knew I was in a society where, as a member of a white minority, I was being challenged every day of my life in that country, and still am, by being a witness to what happens on the streets of that society. I mean, I saw the brutality of apartheid at first hand. There were a lot of white South Africans who saw it, but remained completely passive about it. I try to deal with it through the writing of my plays. I'm hoping that the audience will take away with them a thought that maybe a little bit of self-examination should take place. How passive are we being in watching what is happening in the world? Are we really being active in our response to it, or are we just sitting and watching it happen and doing nothing about it? I think it raises those questions about witnessing and what witnessing should lead to.
We're going to now take a look at a brief passage from one of his productions called Totsy. He wrote it originally as a play in 1980, and then it was produced in 2005 as a movie. And it's a situation where he shows the extreme economic situation that the people are in because of apartheid and the extremes that they go to in order to make some money and to get some money to make their life a little less tenuous. In this particular place, the young man who is in the car has carjacked a car to steal the car, and in doing so, he assaulted the woman that was in the car, pushed her out. She becomes seriously injured. We don't see this part, but what we see is him getting into the car and discovering the unexpected passenger, the child of the woman who owned the car. So let's watch this excerpt. We're now going to see another section from the same production. It's Totsy. And this is Give Back the Baby, where Totsy has had an immense moral crisis and a turnaround and realizes that something must be done to this woman. This woman will live, but she's probably paralyzed for life now, the woman who was carjacked. And so Totsy had given this baby to his girlfriend to take care of, so that his girlfriend could have a baby. But there's a great debate between the girlfriend and Totsy, and eventually Totsy does the right thing and realizes he must return the child to his mother.
Given ko matay.
Akibat. Ke a tseba hore monka kae ngwana. Ke bone newspaper. Ba re mme wa hae ka se hlola tsamaya hape. Ka se kgone go tshetsa maoto a hae. Ba re o tlamehile go tshetsa morwa hae.
Ke eng dide?
Ke lebese. Abasadi ba senang lebese.
E kena ka eng mos? Ya.
Empa le ke be la o etsa mme wa hae. Tiko bomphen. Ke tla o kgutlisetsa yena.
Nna nka mo jekisetsa. Nka tla go bona ka hosane.
So we've seen 3 examples of artists in conflict with their community, 2 photographers and a playwright. And it's interesting because different community standards would apply in different ways to these particular presentations of the arts. But yet these arts were all recording and presenting some aspect of society and the difficulties and problems in society. And again, the artistic agenda of these particular artists led these artists to create these works, even though it resulted in conflict with the community.